Welcome everyone to Idea-thon, applying frameworks to real-life problems. You'll be able to apply the framework you learned on Wednesday along with several other frameworks to real-life problems. Do not worry if you did not make Wednesday's session because Keilin will review that framework too. I am excited to introduce Keilin Jahnke from the Technology Entrepreneurship Center at the University of Illinois. Please feel free to put any questions in the chat at any time. Thank you for coming, Keilin.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm very excited to be here. Thanks for joining at 9 on Friday, the last day of the conference. Today, as Sarah said, I will be walking through a whole bunch of frameworks for coming up with ideas. And so prepare to learn a lot before 10 o'clock. But my goal is that you end with a whole bunch of techniques in your pocket that you can use to come up with ideas, whatever stage you're at, whether you are new to the startup world and just want to know how do I come up with problems and ideas that might be useful to solve, or you have been in the startup world for a long time and you want some refreshers on how do I freshen things up and come up with ideas. So Sarah, if you move to the next slide. Thanks. This is just a little bit about me. Like Sarah said, I'm a professor at the University of Illinois. I teach classes in innovation and creativity. So I'm really excited to be here and share that with you this morning. Next. Okay, so as Sarah, Sarah alluded to, this is a follow-up to Henry Soong's presentation from Wednesday on design thinking. So I wanted to quickly revisit that framework in case you weren't able to be there. And so Henry talked about these three components. He talked about understanding, identifying, and executing on your ideas. And on the next slide, he broke that down even further into how do you understand what your mission is, who you're trying to work with, what problems you're trying to solve, how do you identify solutions that fit whatever metrics you're trying to reach, how do you design solutions and prototype, and then how do you execute, right? How do you actually build your final idea, test it, repeat it until it's something that you want to implement. And so today, if you go to the next slide, Sarah. Thanks. We're going to focus on this middle component, this identifying problems. Next. So today I'm going to give a short recap of and an intro to creativity and design thinking. And then we're going to spend most of our time digging into these two parts, curiosity and problem discovery, and then ideation. How do you actually come up with ideas? And then at the end, we'll wrap up with, okay, so now what? You have a bunch of ideas. What do you do with them? So that's where we're headed today. If you go to the next slide. The first thing we're going to start with, though, hopefully you were prepared for this with an idea-thon, is a warm-up. So I'd love if you could just grab a piece of paper. With this setup, we're going to do these on our own for the most part, but we'll also utilize the chat a lot to type in some of our ideas. So Sarah, if you go to the next slide, our scenario for this warm-up, we are going to imagine that we're going grocery shopping. So you can think about whatever way you go grocery shopping, whether that's going to the actual store or whether that's ordering something online. And what we're going to do with that next is this. How could we make the grocery shopping experience worse? Worse than it already, well, I don't know, maybe you think it's great, maybe you don't. But how can we make it just the worst experience of all time? So I'll give you about 45 seconds to think of a few ideas. And then if you think of anything that you want to share in the chat, I would love to see them. So for instance, if you had to pay only with coins, that would be pretty terrible. Or what else would be pretty terrible? Let's say there were only 2 things available at the grocery store. And you never knew what they were going to be, and you had to pick both of them. All right. As you're thinking, if you do think of anything, you can write it in the chat. I also know it's pretty early and I'm making you think all of a sudden. So feel free to sit back too. All right, so Sarah, all shelves are above your head and you can't reach them. What if there was no organization in the grocery store, right? And you didn't know where the bananas were, where the milk was, or where the bread was. And things were just, maybe every time you went, just reshuffled. That feels like it would be pretty terrible, right? It would take me a long time to buy groceries for my family. So this warm-up has a few practical points. And so Sarah, if you go to the next slide. How can this help you? So this is actually our first ideation technique just from this silly warm-up. And this is the idea of coming up with worst ideas, quote unquote. And why should you do this? Why is this helpful? Well, it gets you thinking, right? It can take a few minutes to get into that creativity groove, right? If you want to come up with ideas, it's like, I don't know, how do I actually do that? And so this, it's kind of fun to come up with horrible ideas for things, right? What would horrible vacation ideas be? Or horrible, ways to go to a restaurant, or horrible ways to hang out with your friends. Those are all kind of silly things to think about, but it helps you identify themes, right? So, if we had a big list, we might see, hey, there's a lot of worst ideas associated with paying for things and the checkout process. So maybe that could be a place where we focus our attention, is when we want to come up with more quote unquote great ideas. Hey, let's think of ways that we can make the checkout process better. And then how could you transform these worst ideas into great ideas? So we could just walk through each one, right? Paying only with coins. Okay, what if you didn't even have to pay? Right? What if you didn't even have to check out? What would that look like? And that is something that Amazon has tried doing. But we could walk through every one and say, hey, what would the opposite be? How can we make this a good idea? So within the first 9 minutes of the session, we already have one ideation technique in your pocket. Next. So bigger picture, we often use this word creativity when we're talking about, hey, I want to come up with creative ideas, or let's be creative and do this, or, oh, that's a really creative idea. And so I'd like to define this before I move forward, because there are a lot of different definitions for creativity. And so the way that we'll define it is simply like this: having ideas and bringing them to be. You have ideas and you bring them to be. There's this idea of lowercase creativity, which is having ideas that are new to you and bringing them to be, or uppercase creativity, or big C creativity, which is having ideas that are new to the world and bringing them to be. And in both of those, you're being creative, right? If I go downstairs and I make some breakfast for myself that I've never made before, I'm being creative, right? I had this idea to make breakfast and I brought it to be. But maybe that's actually the same thing Sarah made for breakfast and I just have no idea. But if I, win the Nobel Peace Prize for a really cool idea that I have, that would be uppercase C, right? Something that's been brand new to the world, never been seen before. And both of those count as creativity. Next. And so design thinking, to tie them into each other, is a framework for creativity, right? So it's one way to have ideas and bring them to be. And design thinking has a big emphasis on empathy and designing for a particular customer and user, which is an awesome way to be creative and to come up with ideas. And so you can see the framework that Henry had introduced on Wednesday with understanding, identifying, and then executing, right? So you're having ideas for particular problems that you have to come up with, and then you're bringing them to be, you're executing them. Next. So I'd like to walk through a few creativity myths, and I know Henry did this too, but these are really important to reiterate. First is that you have to be artistic to be creative, right? Like maybe you think your brother's really good at playing piano, so he's really creative. But, I studied engineering. I'm not really that creative. That's not true. You don't have to be artistic to be creative. You can be creative when you're coming up with any sort of idea, not just art. Next, you can only be creative in certain fields. So just like I alluded to, right? So maybe you think of the arts as places where people are creative, but not engineering or math or science or chemistry. And that's not true. You can be creative in any field. Next, creativity is an innate trait. That's also a myth. Maybe were exposed to more avenues for creativity when you were little than others. But we can all grow and enhance our creativity through learning specific techniques. You cannot become more creative. You can become more creative. If you leave with nothing, it's that you can become more creative. And then there's a single perfect solution to every problem. And this is one, especially if your goal, or if you'd like to start a startup, right, is sometimes we get caught in, okay, I want to do this, but I have this problem I maybe want to solve, but there's got to be one answer. I have to find that. And I can't start until I have that perfect solution. And you know what? The world is complex and pretty messy, and there's actually a lot of solutions that could make a big impact in a particular problem. So there's not necessarily this quote unquote silver bullet solution for every problem. Next, and the last one is that innovative ideas just come to you, right? It just seems like these creative geniuses just come up with really cool ideas. And maybe it seems that way, but there's actually a lot of strategy behind how those ideas just come to them. And you also have access to that same concept, that these innovative ideas don't just come to you, but they actually are a result of a lot of strategy and knowledge. Next. All right, so when I say this, if I told you, hey, come up with an idea, right? I don't know about you, but if I was given this or someone told me just make something, I would be like, but what? I don't know. How do I start? So next. So this is often the reaction. What? How am I supposed to come up with an idea? Maybe you've had to come up with an idea for a class or you know, a specific project, and it takes actually a long time to think of what you want to do. Next. And so today, for the rest of the time, where I'd love to camp out is in that first part of creativity, the having ideas, and specifically to teach you a whole bunch of techniques about curiosity and problem discovery. So how do you become more curious? Why do you even need to be curious? That's a funny word. And then how do you discover problems? And then we'll move on to ideation. So that's, you know, actually coming up with a whole bunch of ideas. How do you do that? And how can you do that more effectively? So that's where we're headed today. Next. But the first thing I want to mention is that coming up with ideas, right, is often associated with this word brainstorming. I'm sure you've heard this term thousands of times, used it, right? And this is another one I'd like to put a definition to, because brainstorming is actually a technique that was developed by Alex Osborne in 1967 with his a book that he wrote. And it's been changed a little bit, but the four main tenets of his rules for brainstorming, I think, still stand and are really valuable when it comes to coming up with ideas. First, and this is whether you do it by yourself or with a group. First, deferring judgment. It can be so easy, right? And we're trained to do this. We're trained to be very critical thinkers, which is a great skill to have. But we all do this. If someone said an idea and it's like, oh, actually, that's not going to work because it's really expensive. Or how are we actually going to do that? Or we don't know enough computer science to do that. But, you know, the first rule of brainstorming, when you're coming up with ideas, defer that judgment, right? Just write down everything, because what can happen? Maybe something will be on that list of ideas that will spark something else that you wouldn't have thought of if you would have said, nope, not going to happen because of XYZ. Second, going for wild ideas. So these are the ones that seem just impossible, right? Maybe they really are expensive, or maybe it's just ridiculous sounding, or maybe it's a silly idea like that grocery store example. But going for wild ideas can, again, you know, help give you a quantity of ideas where maybe there's something cool to pull from. Next is combining ideas. I'll talk about this in a minute. And then the last one is quantity count. So research shows that most times quantity of ideas leads to quality of ideas. So if you have 100 ideas, most likely one of those is going to be better than if you had a list of one idea. And so just coming up while you're brainstorming with a whole bunch of ideas can help you come up with some ideas that really might stick. Next. All right, so let's dig into these curiosity and problem discovery techniques. Next. And like I said, I'm just going to throw a lot of techniques at you. So if it was me, I would just take out a piece of paper and just jot these down. My goal is not that you memorize all of these right now or master them. My goal is that you have, a toolbox that you can pull from when it's time for you to come up with some ideas. So this first one is pretty well known. This is called the problem tree, and it's, okay, how I have like this general idea of maybe a problem area that I want to work on, but how do I narrow it down? How do I know what's the most effective problem for me to work on? So if you go to the next slide, Sarah. Thanks. It really is just this. It looks like a tree, and you don't have to draw it as a tree, right? But it's a good reference for what this technique is used for. So the trunk of the tree could be considered your core problem. The roots of the tree are your causes. So why does that problem exist? What perpetuates this problem? And this often requires you then to dig a little deeper into your problem and figure out, hey, why does it exist in a bunch of different contexts and a bunch of different industries? Maybe you aren't that familiar with your problem actually when you're digging deeper. And so this helps you pause and really have to think about, what are the causes of my problem that I want to help to work towards fixing? And then the leaves are the effects. So what are the consequences of this problem, or what are the benefits? Maybe there's some. What and who does this problem affect? And so on the next slide, this technique is really good for what we would call grand challenge problems, like more big picture global problems. Or if you just are really interested in helping in a particular area, like for instance on here, I have food insecurity. It's a problem that really could use some innovative solutions. But if you are a little stuck on, okay, I know, I would love to help bring a solution, some sort of solution to this issue of food insecurity, but I don't know where to start. And so problem tree, you could think about causes. So why does that exist? What perpetuates the problem? And in particular, different contexts where food insecurity is prevalent. And then you can think about the effects. So because of food insecurity, what are the consequences? What and who does this problem affect? And so some of them, I'm sure we could all just walk through this pretty quickly and come up with 5 causes, 5 effects pretty quickly. But could you sit in it longer? Could you spend 10, 15, 20 minutes, an hour, a day, a week on this, and really, really dig into this issue, in this example of food insecurity, to really develop causes and effects? Because what might happen, you might come up with, you can't see, I can't move my mouse, I don't have anything to show you, but if you look at one of those roots, at the very, very bottom of the root might be the problem that you are most fit to solve based on your, where you are in life, your background, your context that you're working in, your skills. And so maybe that's the one that would be most effective for you, or the particular context you'd like to solve a problem for. But you might not have thought of that if I first just said solve food insecurity, right? That feels pretty broad. The next slide, Sarah, addresses a different kind of problem. So you don't always have to focus on these grand challenge problems, right? For instance, if we were Airbnb, way back in the day before Airbnb started, we could say, hey, the hotel space, that feels like there's some room for improvement. It's an opportunity for improvement. And so we as the Airbnb team could have sat down and said, hotels, okay, what are the causes? So what are the problems with hotels? What perpetuates that problem? Why are hotels, I don't know, they might feel pretty boring after a while. They're all kind of the same. You walk into a room, you kind of know what to expect. And then what are the effects of that problem? So what are the consequences of hotels, meaning because hotels are a certain way, how do people feel about that? And then what and who does this problem affect? So this is a more unique spin on a problem tree. I know it doesn't quite make as much sense as maybe like a grand challenge problem as your trunk, but this is another way of breaking it down, right? Because for instance, maybe one problem with hotels was that they were designed in many ways for a mass market, right? They're designed for a lot of people to come in and out of every day. And so the effect of that is it's not really a unique experience. You know what you're going to expect. It's not really something that you might look forward to if you're just spending the night, in a hotel on your way somewhere else. It's not really like a unique, fun experience. And so what did Airbnb do? They flipped that, right? They said, let's make this, the overnight experience, not at your home, something that's fun, something that's entertaining, something that's custom. And so you get to pick from all sorts of places to stay at all different prices. And so they really, in some ways, utilize this framework to come up with their final solution. And they continue to do that even through at least the past year, right? Airbnb's come up with all sorts of new ideas for how they can best serve customers. So what I'd like to do, if you go to the next slide, Sarah, is give you a minute to come up with your own problem tree. There's nothing to write in the chat, so no need to put anything there. But I'd like for you to choose a local, global, or grand challenge problem. So maybe this is something that you have been thinking about for a while. Maybe it's a space you're already working in. Maybe it's something that you learned from a previous session this week. And I'm just going to give you a few minutes to think of 5 causes or roots. So why does that problem exist? And then can you identify 5 effects? So what are the consequences or benefits of the problem, and who has this problem? All right, I'll give you till 9:25. And I wish I had some music to play, but I don't. So you're welcome to turn on some of your own music if you want. All right, it's 9:25. I wish we were all in a room together so I could see what you came up with. If at any point you do want to type into the chat, either like Sarah said with a question, or if you come up with something that you want to share, I'd love to see it. But Sarah, if you go to the next slide, there is one more thing you can do with this. And I hinted at this when I explained the problem tree, but you can expand upon one of these causes or roots and develop 5 associated causes, right? So this could help if you wanted to dig deeper. This is how you would do that process of digging deeper. All right, I see in the chat, more than 50% of American workforce is unhappy with their jobs. Yeah, okay, that's a great core problem right in the middle. And there are so many ways that you could address that. And so that feels like a awesome problem to work on. Causes: bad managers, salary, interests not aligned, growth, bad team. Yes, those are awesome. And I love how in some ways what you focused on all had to do with one, you went on one train of thought, right? But we could also think about, what about what's going on in, employees' lives outside of work? Maybe there's something there that we could help and come up with an idea to help so that they do feel more satisfied with their job. The effects: employees feel demotivated, employees are not productive, employees hop jobs. Yeah, this is awesome. And so you could, what you would do next with this, thanks for sharing that. What you could do next, right, is take any of these and say, okay, what kinds of ideas could we come up with if we have a bad manager? Of course, the first idea is, I wish I didn't have a bad manager. But maybe there's specific ways, ideas you can come up with to help that specific problem of if someone has a bad manager or a bad team. Employees feel demotivated, right? And they don't feel motivated to continue working. So we could focus on, hey, let's come up with ideas to motivate workers. What would that look like? And you can make this specific to a specific industry or context or type of job or demographic of people. And that's one way that you could come up with some cool ideas to help address that really relevant core problem. Awesome, thanks for sharing. All right, next. So problem tree, technique number 1. Technique number 2, and this is not something you have to do right now, but I do want to introduce this concept of T versus pi people. And so T, if you look at those lines on the screen, it looks like a T. And so on the top, on the horizontal line, we have knowledge and background. So if this T represents a person, that horizontal line represents all of their knowledge and their background that they have at that point in life. And the vertical line represents their depth of understanding or their experiences. And so, I know you all are at different points in life and are coming in from different things that you're working on and doing. But for instance, me, right, I went to school for a long time. And so I have, a pretty far depth of understanding in one particular field, right? And that's what school is, especially college, is good at having you do, right? You get to learn a lot about specific thing. And that's not bad, right? You get to know and become an expert in a specific area. But if you go to the next slide, where T people versus this, a pi person, quote unquote pi person, what if I had that same level of expertise in 2 fields? Or, next slide, what if I had knowledge or experience in a whole bunch of different areas? This is just 4, but I'm sure even you could think of a bunch for yourself. The more experiences you have, or the more you understand and pull from your background too, the more ways you have to connect ideas. And I'm going to talk about connecting ideas in a few minutes. But see, if I, this thing that I went to school for a really long time for, right? And maybe my specific experience, I have a specific experience that I could pull from to come up with some cool ideas in my primary, area of expertise. And so this really helps you be able to connect ideas. And even more importantly, if you have the next slide, Sarah, please, is this: if you have a team of people, and this is why you often have to do team projects, or it is kind of just more fun to come up with ideas sometimes with a team. It's because of this, right? You have all sorts of areas of expertise and things that that you can pull from when you're coming up with ideas. And this is why diversity in teams is so important, not just in knowledge, but in backgrounds and your lived experience, because you have so many different things to be able to pull from when you're trying to come up with ideas or problems to solve, or even how best to tackle them. You all can contribute because of your unique way that you have, that you've lived and the things that you know. So this technique, there's nothing for you to write down, but it's an important one to know that, not only, building diverse teams, that's important, but 2, that this can help you as you're thinking through, how do I come up with ideas? It's, hey, what are all the things that I already know? How can I pull from those to come up with ideas? Next, team 3, technique number 3. I told you this is kind of rapid fire. We're moving all over the place today. This is storyboarding and experience. You might have heard of this technique as journey mapping, a customer journey map, and it's very similar. So this is one way that you can visualize an experience that people have for the purpose of trying to find something unique that you didn't think of at first. And you'll see a theme with all of these problem techniques is, hey, how do I think of something that doesn't come to mind at first? How do I push past those first couple ideas? So for instance, on the next slide, let's revisit the grocery store. Let's say we're going to go to the grocery store, right? I know everyone has different experiences depending on the type of grocery store you go to, what you're trying to buy, what your overall objective is there. But, in general, if you're going to a store, you're going to walk in through some front doors and you're going to walk out the front doors when you leave. And so this is essentially a timeline of all of the different things that you're going to do while you're in the grocery store. Next. So I'll give you about 60 seconds. Can you think of 10 steps in this specific experience? And if you would like, if you feel comfortable, you can write your most unique or specific step in the chat. What I mean is most specific step of going to the grocery store. So like for instance, I don't know, maybe you're going to buy cereal, right? And so you go to the cereal aisle and look for the box that you want. But also, for instance, maybe I want to buy some apples and I need a bag to put the apples in, right? Well, so I want to buy apples. So I go to the produce section. But then I need to get a bag. And I don't know if anyone's tried doing this, especially in the past year with our masks on, but it's kind of hard to open those plastic bags, right? And it takes a minute, and maybe you need some moisture on your hands, which you're not going to really have. I don't know, unless you dip your hand in water. And so, then you have to try to open this bag, this plastic bag. So for instance, that is one, a specific step that, hey, can I innovate in that space? All right, I'll give you, you can write in the chat if you want, but it's Friday morning, you don't have to. But try to see if you can come up with a unique step in the grocery store. Unique or very specific. All right, Sarah just said, looking at the candy before you check out. The pesky aisle with all of the stuff that is just so close and easy to put on the conveyor belt. Yeah, looking at the candy. That's a great one. This is maybe specific to me, but I have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. And so when we go to the grocery store, we stop and look at all the fish in the fish tank in the back of the store. It's like at a good halfway point between, we've gone through half the grocery store, but I know we have a bit to go. But thankfully those fish are just hanging out in the back of my store. And so, how you could use this, running on that example of the fish store, the fish in the back of the store, is, hey, actually, who goes to the grocery store? A lot of different people, but there's a specific demographic of parents with young children, right, who often get antsy. And so I don't know, maybe you've seen parents who like open one of the bags of food or open something and let their kids snack on it, because what are you going to do? Your kid might start crying in the middle of the store, but you're almost stuck, right? You need to buy groceries. You're there for a purpose. And so how could, for instance, we could use this storyboard to then narrow down to the problem of, okay, how can we specifically help this demographic of people who come to the store with young children, 5 and under, and how do we make that experience better for them, right? If there was a grocery store in my town, and I don't think mine did it on purpose with that fish tank, but if there was one that specifically catered to that demographic, I would care what the prices were, but I would be really willing to go there, right? Because it could help with my situation of when I go to the grocery store with my little kids. And so that's the purpose of this storyboard, where it can really help. One, it can help you find specific areas for ideation and innovation, or it could help you focus on, hey, what's actually my experience, or what's someone else's perspective going to the store, and how can I make that experience best for them? So you could do this for all sorts of experiences, right? You could do this for food delivery, for instance. You could do this for going to the airport. You could do this to going to, it's been a long time since we've been to concerts or sporting events, right? But you could walk through that experience as well. Or you could do this even over a longer period of time, right? So what's the process of people who are, I don't know, trying to rent an apartment or purchase a house, right? What's that whole experience like? And is there a place that might be a pain point for those people that we could spend some time innovating on? So again, like those other techniques, this just helps you really have to hone in and focus intentionally on the process instead of just rushing through and saying, okay, I want to fix the process of going to the grocery store. I don't know. That seems tricky. Next. And this last one is, I'll just jump through this quickly. Empathy maps. This was developed by Keilin Jahnke. They have a really cool book called Creative Confidence that I would highly recommend. But they have this idea of empathy maps. And so this is really great if you are wanting to design something for a particular group of people. And after you do customer discovery and you do interviews, and I know that was another session this week is customer discovery, but what do you do with that information that you collect from interviews? And so an empathy map is one way to map out what you learned. So what did people say, right? What did they tell you? But what are they thinking, right? What are they feeling about that specific area or problem? And then what are they actually doing? These are the intentional outward actions. And so you'll find that often these are all a little different from one another, but it might help you move past just what people are saying, which is a great starting point, into, okay, I know you say, for instance, for me, I know you say you like working out, but what are you actually thinking and what are you actually feeling when you don't work out? And then what are you actually doing, right? And so maybe that part, that what am I actually doing, that's the part that I need to tap into to come up with some innovative ideas so that I will work out, for instance. And so empathy maps are a great tool to organize what you've learned in the problem discovery process. Next. And so for the next little bit of time, I'd like to just throw a whole bunch of ideation techniques at you. So those past ones were how do I explore the problem a little bit more? And then these are, okay, now how do I come up with some ideas? So if you move to the next slide, please, Sarah. The first one was those worst ideas, that grocery store experience at the beginning, right? Just come up with some bad ideas. Maybe you'll find some themes in that, and maybe it'll help spark some good ideas. Next. This next one is juxtaposition, and this is the fancy term for combining ideas, and I've hinted at this a few times today, but this is the process of combining two elements together to make something new. And actually research shows that the more different those things are, the more unique, innovative, and new ideas that you'll come up with. And so the purpose is to combine and to create new things that otherwise would not exist. And so next. Oh, those are really blurry circles. Maybe it's just my screen. But those circles, here's the concept, right? Taking two things and combining them. So if you go to the next slide, Sarah, with my students, I actually use this example, and I'll give you 20 seconds to think of this. How could we combine popcorn and basketball? If I just give you those words, what ideas could you come up with to combine and make something new? All right, so maybe the first things you came up with are, okay, let's make popcorn that's as big as a basketball, or orange popcorn like a basketball, or let's come up with, oh, you sell popcorn at basketball games, maybe let's just make that more of a thing that you can buy popcorn at basketball games. But if we would do this, and like I do this in class for a long time, like 10, 20 minutes, those things that we would come up with at the end, I guarantee are more unique than these first ones that we came up with. And not that those were bad, but how can we spend more time combining these two concepts? And then something that you can do is not just popcorn is that physical, delicious little treat, and basketball is that orange ball that's used for a game. But you can think about, okay, popcorn, where do you eat popcorn? Why do people eat it? How do people eat it? What is it like? What are all the different variations? Basketball, same thing, right? Where do you use basketballs? What are they like? You know, they're filled with air, for instance. Popcorn, I don't know, how could we fill popcorn with air to make it more airy? As just an example. So you can use the elements or the components or the context of your two things you want to combine to also help you come up with ideas. Oh, let's see, win popcorn if you slam dunk a basketball. There you go, you're making a game out of combining these ideas. So if you go to the next slide, Sarah, you can do this with all sorts of two different elements. You can do this with a specific problem. So let's say the problem of, I don't know, we can do go looking at the candy before you check out. Maybe we'll consider that to be a place we want to innovate, come up with some cool ideas around that. And then a random word, right? So you could just say, let's combine that with popcorn or basketball, what things we come up with. But you could also use this with a teammate with specific areas of interest. If let's say you have a teammate that you really want to start something with, you could think about what are we both, like where are our areas of expertise, what do we like doing, and how can we combine those to come up with some cool ideas. So this is a really versatile and really foundational ideation technique. Next. Number 3 is this idea of context squares. And I'm actually going to explain this through an example. So if you go to the next slide, Sarah, if I told you all, and this might be really relevant in the past year, how could you design a hand washing station for the following contexts? So a hand washing station, let's just say, you know, I want you all to develop something where people can actually wash their hands with soap and water. But I want you to design one for a kindergarten classroom, a campsite, and an airport. I'll actually give you about a minute to see if you can come up with something for one or more of these contexts. So at a little after 9:44. All right. Again, I wish we were in a room and I could see if you drew something out, and I'd probably give you more time if we were in the classroom too. But maybe you could draw something out, or you could write down some components as to what you would be sure to include in these 3 contexts. And if you go to the next slide, Sarah, the reason that this is helpful for ideation is it really helps you try to figure out what is the actual context in which you're working in, right? What are the specific political, educational, economic, technical, mechanical aptitude, and cultural factors that you are working with. And so the purpose of this is to constrain your ideation, right? So you have to think about a particular context instead of just design a hand washing station for everyone, right? And remember, there's not necessarily a silver bullet or perfect solution for every problem. And then this helps you intentionally think about the context and the assumptions. So maybe actually what you did when you had those 3 different contexts to design for is you said, okay, if I was in a kindergarten classroom, they are all children. Kindergartners are usually around 5, at least in the US. So, okay, they're 5. You know, what would a 5-year-old, you know, what could help them use a hand washing station? I don't know, maybe the teacher wants to make sure that there's not water and soap everywhere that she or he has to clean up afterwards. And so, you know, as soon as I put a specific context to that, you probably already, maybe even unintentionally, started thinking through assumptions that you have about that particular context. And same with a campsite, right? Maybe there's not a lot of water available, or people come back from hikes and they want to wash their hands, and so they might be, you know, pretty messy. And the last one was an airport, right? And so that is, hey, you really want people to go through fast and be efficient. And we might have a lot of people who are using the station. Airport, a big hand wash station, automatic to make it comfortable for people carrying bags on their shoulders. That's awesome, right? And so how you can use context squares I know I gave you some purposes, but even if you don't know the specific context that you want to design something for, oh, I see a lot of, Rob, I did the grocery store step 10 exercise. It was interesting to see what 10, 11 steps I do on autopilot. Yeah, that's great. So the storyboard, and if you kept going, I bet you would have to think even more about all the specifics that go in the meantime. Awesome, this is fun. So the context was, even if you didn't, you were told to design a hand washing station, but you didn't actually know the context, right? This could help you come up with some assumptions about different contexts you might have. And then it might help you see, hey, actually, no matter what context, I want to make sure that this is true about my hand washing station. So maybe we want to make sure that, people who are carrying bags, so whether we're in a school or a college campus, people might have backpacks or something on them. So how can we make it more comfortable for them? And that, so that specific assumption that you made could apply to multiple contexts. So this could just help constrain your ideation, even if you don't know the particular context that you'll be working in. Next. All right, this next one is one of my favorites, the now, how, and wow ideas. You might have seen this before, but I think this graphic does a nice job of explaining what all of these types of ideas mean. So if you see on the x-axis, we're moving from low impact ideas to high impact. And then on the y, we have easy to create ideas versus pretty difficult ideas. So, now ideas, low impact, easy to create, do it, it's awesome. How ideas up at the top are these ones that have high impact for a particular context, but are actually probably really difficult to create. Maybe what you need to create it doesn't even exist yet, or maybe you need $5 billion, right? I don't have $5 billion to make a how idea happen. And maybe you need some sort of resources that don't exist, like some technology, for instance. And so the sweet spot when you come up with ideas are these wow ideas, these ones that have high impact but are easy to create. But there's a lot of merit in trying to constrain your ideation into these three categories. So Sarah, if you go to the next slide, please. What you could do, for instance, is take a specific problem from your problem tree or from anywhere in this talk in the last 50 minutes and see, can you come up with 2 now ideas, 2 how ideas, and 2 wow ideas? And this also goes back into those rules of brainstorming, right, with deferring judgment and going for wild ideas. And so I put coming up with how ideas actually before coming up with wow ideas intentionally, because sometimes it's fun to come up with wild ideas, right? And not that those how ideas can't happen eventually, right? There's a lot of innovation that's happened in human history that at one point seemed impossible. And so those ideas aren't necessarily ones to throw away, but you have to decide, if I actually want to start a startup, for instance, do I want to pursue a how idea? Do I have the resources to do so? Or the ability to gather the resources that I want? Or those wow ideas, those ones that I can create that would have actually really high impact. Where do you want to camp out is a question that you can personally decide. Anyway, because of the time, maybe jot this down and then you could do this later on your own time. Next. We have a few more to go through and I'll go through fast. I keep mentioning this, but you can challenge the assumptions about your problem. So next, for instance, if we go back to the grocery store example, instead of just thinking through the experience that exists currently, we could even think big picture. Okay, what am I assuming? Well, I'm assuming that a grocery store, technically, you can also buy groceries online, I know, but grocery stores are buildings that people go to. They sell food. That's an assumption I'm making. I'm assuming that they sell multiple categories of products, right? I can buy produce and I can buy meat and I can buy, packaged foods. Most grocery stores are big. I think depending on where you live, you may or may not make that assumption. People serve themselves in grocery stores. I have to go, I get my cart and I have to do my own thing. It's an assumption. Groceries come packaged, right? A lot of our groceries are packaged. And then people are limited to buying what is currently available at the store, right? So I'm assuming that when I go to the store, those are my only options. So this technique of challenging your assumptions make you think a little bit bigger picture and pull back of, okay, I want to solve X problem, but what am I actually assuming about that problem? And actually, maybe there's something in this list that I could challenge. And you can probably see some of the ways that these have been challenged, like groceries come packaged, for instance, right? There's grocery stores that offer a lot of bulk food where you can bring your own packaging, or, you know, are able to package food in larger quantities to reduce packaging and be a little bit more sustainable. And so these are all areas, if you challenge your assumptions, list them out, that you can innovate in and come up with some cool ideas. Next. And then this one, the focused innovation type. I don't actually want to talk much about this, but there's this really cool book called The 10 Types of Innovation that talks about just this. There's 10 types of places to innovate. And so I know it's a little blurry, but those two orange ones in the middle are actually what we normally think about when we think of innovation. We think of our product or our offering, the service, the thing that we're going to be able to provide to people. But this book talks about these other 8 types of innovation. Configuration. So actually, if you go to the next slide, Sarah, I think it's explained there. Configuration. So how are you getting your offering, your product or your service to people? For instance, this could be like a business plan. And then the experience, why are you doing it? And how do your customers or your whatever group you're helping to work towards helping, how are they interacting with your product? So those are also ways that you can innovate too. So not all innovations need to be products. Next. And so, for instance, you can think through that, even going back to that product performance, so your actual offering, you could think about simplifying your product to innovate on it. You can think about adding a functionality, making it more sustainable, more customizable, more safe. And so this book, I would highly recommend it, walks through tactics for each one of these types of innovation. So how do you innovate in your brand, or how do you innovate in your profit model, how you make money or sustain your entity. Next. And so we won't do this because of time, but in what ways could a grocery store innovate, right? Maybe they could have a really cool brand and that would help a grocery store become a little bit more innovative, for instance, or service. Maybe they have really good customer service. And so those are ways that you can think through innovating rather than just what is the grocery store selling and how could we improve that. Next. And then this last one, quantity often leads to quality. If I had you for another hour, I'd make you come up with 100 ideas for a single problem because, like I said, research shows that this often does work in coming up with more innovative ideas. Next. And if you get stuck, you can use other ideation techniques. If we had time, I would see if you come up with 20 ideas, but it is a challenge, right, to sit down and try to think of a lot of ideas. Next. So how do you actually select an idea? That's a good question. And you can go to the next slide, Sarah. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but you do, once you diverge this idea of coming up with a lot of ideas, you have to pick one, right? Or pick a few to actually implement. So how do you do that? There are some logical strategies that you can find and methods to selecting ideas. And I'm not going to go through those, but in general, some big picture questions to ask yourself is, what do you want to work on? What are your decision-making criteria? How do you actually want to make the decision of selecting an idea? Who should help you make that decision? What do people want to use, buy, or experience? Who are your customers or your potential audience? And then what is your mission or purpose, right? What do you want out of pursuing your idea? And those are all good places to start in terms of what do you actually care about. Next. And this is a difficult but a necessary step, right? It's really fun to ideate and come up with a lot of ideas. But if you do want to make something that's going to make an impact to someone, you will have to select an idea at some point. Next. So I just have a few more slides to show you. The final creativity myths is first this: creativity should be easy and shouldn't have any structure, constraints, or rules, right? So that is very nice in theory. But sometimes creativity is kind of hard to come up with ideas, right? And actually putting a structure on it helps frame your ideation to make creativity, that process of having ideas and bringing them to be a little bit easier on yourself. And so that was the intention of showing you all sorts of techniques today, is that, hey, here's all sorts of structures you can use when you need a little bit of help coming up with some ideas. And then all innovative ideas need to be complex. I think we have this tendency to think big and to think, I'm going to make, you know, the next world-changing idea. And that's awesome. If that is one of your goals, stick with it. It totally is feasible. But they don't all have to be complex, right? Maybe a way to solve a particular problem that you or someone you know is experiencing is actually pretty simple solution, and that's fine. That's part of the point of the problem tree too, right? Is to dig past just the main global problem or the main challenge that someone's having. How do you find something that's actually really practical and high impact, but that low difficulty to implement? So those can be really impactful too. All right, so on the next few slides, actually you can go through these pretty quick, Sarah. How to be creative and come up with ideas. How do you do this, right? The first thing is to practice. Practice being creative. The more you practice, the better you'll get coming up with ideas. The more those techniques and techniques that work for you, other ones, will just become more natural and will just come to mind. So then learn the techniques so you have some structure. And then the last one is this: observe, explore, and network. And these tie into that curiosity and problem solving. How do you be curious? Observe the world around you. How do you explore? And then how do you network? How do you meet others who you could either form a team with, right? Remember, and form that pie people team where you all have a lot of knowledge and expertise, that you come together and you have this huge amount of knowledge and expertise and experiences. Or how do you just network and meet someone who can share an experience that is unfamiliar to you and learn a little bit more about someone else's perspective. So these are all ways to help enhance your creativity. And then on the last few slides, I just want to summarize what we learned today. So first, this is a giant list of all those techniques that I walked through today. So you could take a screenshot of this, or if you just want to quickly jot these down. But we talked about curiosity and problem discovery. So the problem tree, T versus pie, people and teams, storyboarding and experience, empathy maps, ideation, worst ideas, juxtaposition, context squares, now, how, wow ideas, challenging assumptions, a focused innovation type, and quantity leads to quality. And then the next slide, it's 9:59, so I won't walk through these, but there's a whole bunch of other ways to be creative. Jot your ideas down in a notebook, carry, on your phone or on a notepad, whatever is best for you. Build a team, diverge, come up with a lot of ideas, and then converge. Let yourself do that. Develop a habit of slowing down, go out and explore nature, minimize the pressure associated with ideation. I think that's a big one. All right, it's 10 o'clock. Thanks for sticking with me throughout this whole presentation. There's my information. If you have any questions or would like to contact me, there's my email. I'd be more than happy to connect and learn about what you're working on and help in any way if I can. Thank you all for being here. And thanks, Sarah, for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much, Keilin, for coming. This was great. I learned a lot of different techniques for myself, and I'm sure everyone else did, so thank you. And walking through real life problems so we understand how to use these frameworks. So also, thank you everyone for attending our event. We would love for you to share your feedback of the event on your Instagram stories or other social media platforms. Please do this by tagging Chicago Startup Week to let us know what you thought. So thank you again, Keilin. This was fantastic. And up next, we have the pitch competition. And to attend those, you can click on the left-hand side on sessions and check it out there. So thank you again.
Thanks, Sarah.
Yep. So this is the end of the session. Thank you.
I don't know if you're still here, who asked the question about if I have any courses on Coursera or online. I don't, unfortunately. I have I have written a book on creativity, but it's a few years old. So actually what you learned today is probably more relevant than what you would learn in that book. But I'd love to connect afterwards too, if you would like to. All right, thank you everyone for being here. Have a great rest of your event.